The message of the gospel addresses several issues, one being that Christ teaches us how to approach conflict and conflict resolution. Christ then defines for us community, and he also encourages us to speak up, and it's all wrapped in love. Shall we begin with conflict and conflict resolution? I don't know about you, but for me, it is a big hurdle. I would rather walk away than to confront someone. When I walk away, I can justify walking away by saying to myself that it doesn't matter anyway. I'm better off without it or them. I've even justified it to myself by saying, must have not been God's will. In the process, what happens to me is that the resentment begins to live rent-free in my brain. It begins to erode my self-confidence, my self-esteem, and my self-worth. Because of where I work and what I do, I'm approached by others who are angry and resentful. I offer up to them the fourth step prayer. The fourth step prayer goes something like this. If you have a resentment you want to be free of, you need to pray for that person and ask God to give them everything that you would want for yourself. It may be peace, it may be prosperity, it may be patience. Ask God to give it to them tenfold. If you will do that every day for 7 days, you will be free. What you will find is that it no longer lingers, and you may find peace. If it still lingers, then begin again with step 1. Now, if you begin with what Jesus shares with Peter in the Gospel of Matthew, it probably will expedite the healing process. Christ shares with us step 1. If another member of the church sins against you, go and point it out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. Christ doesn't say that they will agree with you. Christ doesn't say that they will accept what you have to say and change. What Christ says is that they will listen. Step 2, Christ knows that we may have a stubborn streak. I know I do. So he takes it a step further. If we are not listened to, take some support. And then step 3, if that does not help, then take it to the church. Eric Burrito, in his commentary on Matthew 18, gives us a definition of church. He begins by explaining that Jesus commended Peter's faith and declared that the church will be built upon a critical moment of faith, although the church can be destabilized by conflict. Remember, at the time of Christ, the church had not been built. Eric Burrito reminds us that church, as I mentioned, was not built until the resurrection with its mission to the world. Eric Burrito continues by writing, the church is defined as the body of believers bound by faith in the crucified and resurrected Christ, which was a future reality for Matthew's Jesus. In a sense, Christ speaks wisdom to a community not yet founded. In these two references of church, we may see most clearly the kinds of concern that drove the composition of Matthew's gospel. The narratives describe the deepest concern of Matthew's community, concerns so important that Jesus himself addresses them directly. Jesus reminds the faithful that first and foremost is, with great power comes great responsibility. In instructing his disciples, Christ reminds us that community is vital and God's gift to us, and the very setting in which God will move among us. Don't forget, where two or more are gathered, so is God. And yet that community, as we know too well, has to be preserved, protected from bitter and pointless dissension. Unresolved conflict ought not to happen in a silent corner behind closed doors where differences in power can overwhelm the weak. It will divide a church. It is unrealistic to think that this will never happen to a church. What we need to meet it head on with is love. Let's review. Conflict and dissension. Step 1, go and discuss the issues when the two of you are alone. Step 2, if you're not listened to, take some support. And step 3, if that does not help, then take it to the church community. So let's move on. Step 4, speak up. We need to learn to speak up. Along with conflict resolution, speaking up is also a challenge for me. I can justify that one by saying that it's really not my problem. I am really an introvert and would rather not speak out. My job keeps me from speaking up. The bottom line is that my fear keeps me from speaking out. I wonder what would have happened if Peter spoke out when he was asked if he knew Jesus of Galilee. Peter denied him 3 times because of fear. The disciples hid while Jesus was crucified because of fear. Today, as I get closer to Christ, I ask myself, would I be like Mary and stand with the disciple Jesus loved? Or would I hide like the other disciples because of fear? In World War I, before beginning his theological studies, Martin Niemöller was a naval officer and commander of a German U-boat. After World War I, he became a pastor in a fashionable suburb of Berlin. 2 years later, as a protest against interference in church affairs by the Nazi Party, Niemöller founded the Pastors' Emergency League. The group helped combat rising discrimination against Christians of Jewish descent caught in the tension between a religious definition as Christian and the German radical definition of Jews based on the identity of their grandparents. Niemöller was influential in building opposition to Hitler's efforts to bring the German churches under control of the Nazis and the so-called German Christians. Niemöller continued to speak out, and in 1937 he was arrested by Hitler's secret police, the Gestapo. Eventually he was sent to concentration camps at Sachsenhausen and Dachau. He stayed there until he was freed at the end of World War II. Martin Niemöller is best known for the following quotations. We've all heard it, we know it. First, they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Niemöller believed the leaders of the Protestant churches had been complicit through their silence in the Nazi imprisonment, persecution, and murder of millions of Jewish people. Reverend Troy Perry spoke out. He spoke out for every gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered that was ostracized by their families, loved ones, and the church. God spoke to him, and he spoke to the people. There are other activists in the Universal Fellowship of Metropolitan Community Churches. Reverend Mel White, Reverend Dr. Nancy Wilson, to name a few. Our own pastor, Reverend Garrison, locally speaks out for each one of us here. He also speaks out for those of color. He speaks out for those of different religious and ethnic backgrounds. He uses his voice. For all of us who are afraid to speak out against the bathroom bill, he used his voice. For all of us who are afraid to voice our support for those that are transgendered and in our military, he uses his voice. For all of us who hesitate to voice our support of the Cove, a safe haven for gay and lesbian teens, he uses his voice. For all of us who allow fear to control us, he uses his voice. He steps up and he steps out. So, how do you think Niemöller's quote would look like today? First, they came for the Muslims, and I did not speak out because I was not a Muslim. Then they came for the illegal immigrants, and I did not speak out because I was not an illegal immigrant. Then they came for the dreamers, and I did not speak out because I was not a dreamer. Then they came for the people of color, and I did not speak out because I was not a person of color. Then they came for those that were HIV positive, and I did not speak out because I was not HIV positive. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. The most important question we need to ask ourselves today and every day is, where is the love? Jesus said, all the law and prophets hang on two commands, to love God and love your neighbor. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is fulfilling of the law. Will you be the one? Will you be the one that speaks up? Will you be the one that speaks out? Will you be the one that speaks loud? Will you be the one that speaks now? For it is written, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them. Blessed be to God. Amen.